All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Palantir Weekly. This is episode number 220, and this is the Q1 2025 earnings preview. We got a big earnings coming up, Q1 on Monday after the bell. Matt, Arnie, Amir, and probably a couple others will be live with me starting around 3:30 p.m., and we will see the numbers and results that Palantir reports. I'm here today with Arnaldo, Matt Money. How are you guys doing?
Arnaldo,
like here, I'm currently in Bali, and here I can't say Arnaldo because it's like too complicated for many people. So it's just Arnie or Arnold Schwarzenegger.
How have people interpreted your name there? Like, what do they think of you? They see you as this like Italian guy that's like.
They walk up and they ask for his OnlyFans.
So many people just tell me, like, as soon as I open the mouth, it's like, you must be Italian. I think, come on. I even study in the UK. I try to speak like weekly, but daily, maybe English with you guys, and still I can't hide it.
I mean, you've been enjoying Bali, that's for sure. You got purple robe, Palantir, all-time highs. I mean, waterfall in the back. I mean, the only response could be this under that, you know? So there you go. All right, guys, we got some stuff to talk about for the next hour. Palantir Weekly, big Palantir earnings. I think we'll start off with this question, and then we'll get deeper into the numbers and kind of the nuances. We do have a bunch of Palantir updates, a lot of Palantir news this week, but main thing is earnings. Basically, stocks at all-time highs. 125.41 is the all-time. We're at like 124.50. We'll start with you, Matt. What's your raw reactions to us getting right back to where we were in February?
I think it's interesting, man. I mean, I agree that the stock is one of a kind and a generational opportunity, but I think it's just, and maybe I'm speaking too ahead of myself before we kind of go through some of the numbers, but it's astonishing to me. I had no doubt in my mind that at one point we would be trading at the stock price, but it have happened twice this year at the 120 to 125 mark is pretty astonishing. It's several years ahead of forecast for me, for sure.
Arnie, your thoughts of us getting back to where we were, basically a $300 billion market cap now?
Can I say that these are the moments where I find it more difficult to extrapolate really what is happening rather than the moments where there is clearly fear and you know that you don't have to think too much. Like if you know what you're buying, you know the quality of what you're buying, you can just pull the trigger. When the stock almost doubles in a month, it's true is returning to a more price that it was just before, but still that makes you have some question. And complicating everything is the fact that this company is not static. Like every effing week, there is something interesting going on. And there are so many interesting things going on right now that are not just marginal. Like we are talking about measured shift that could open insane doors. I'm thinking, for instance, the NATO contract for Maven. We don't know the dollar amount, but we know that when we are talking about Maven, we are talking about like the top-notch AI for defense that has been already deployed by the US government. We know that the contracts there is big. We can have an intuition that also for NATO, this potential contract can be big and unlocking a lot of network effects. The point is, who knows how big this stuff is? We know that there are high chances Palantir is somehow related to Doge, being that directly or indirectly by pushing like pressure into the US government to adopt software. And even there, we have intuition that stuff are moving and are moving fast. We have no real idea of the extension to which this goes. So right now, the price is incorporating this dynamic of everything will be better, which I also agree it will be. It's very hard to say how much it will be better, because on one side, the stock is running a little bit ahead of the financial numbers as of today, but it is also true that we are in that acceleration phase where we're moving from like 15%, 20%, 30%, 35%, or 36% as of last quarter. And the company itself is guiding for 36% growth in the quarter. And typically they guide for something that tends to be beaten by 3-4%. So is the company actually guiding in reality something closer to 40%? Maybe, but if that is the case, it means that the acceleration that we are seeing is not actually slowing down the more it grows. And if that keeps continuing going in that direction, the valuation, rather than being expensive, is actually cheap. So it's a bit of, are we betting that the acceleration that we are seeing can continue for 1-2 years at least? If someone doesn't believe it will happen, it's dramatically overvalued. If the acceleration actually is taking place, personally, I think that's the case, we may be not overvalued and even be undervalued.
Yeah, it's just been really interesting to see all the different dynamics between the qualitative things that we've seen, like NATO. We'll talk about what Karp said in some speeches he gave this week. Titan, we had a Bloomberg article come out about that yesterday. And then compared to the quantitative, because we've had plenty of discussions and conversations and debates on this podcast over the past really couple months, given Palantir stock has gone up and down dramatically around valuation, what it means to understand the valuation, the market cap, price to sales, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're at the point where obviously stock's expensive. It's trading at 100 times sales, which is a bit aggressive, 600 times earnings. But, you know, I was thinking about this today. Netflix trades at 50 times earnings. Apple trades at 35 times earnings. All of those companies, any like traditional valuation expert would say, these are the wrong valuations for those stocks to trade at. They would say the same about Palantir. Yet those stocks command a multiple for some reason other than their quantitative metrics. And obviously for Palantir, it's just very aggressive in terms of the multiple that it commands, but there are some holistic things that are part of the story that are not just numerical to be able to command that multiple. So I guess we'll get started with this part of the conversation. I want to bring up this tweet by Matt. Let's get into Q1 revenue guidance, because this is really what matters, right? What revenue do they show up with? Matt tweeted that Palantir first quarter revenue could remain flat for the fourth quarter and still be up 31%. So Matt, here's the question. Are we getting ready for a 40% quarter or a high 30% quarter if we know we're not going to remain flat going into Q1?
I think it's possible. Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, to give people some context before I maybe dive into this, what I mean here is we meaning Palantir, delivered $828 million in the fourth quarter. If they maintain that, so 0% quarter over quarter growth going from the fourth quarter that they reported just in February to now at 828, that even still is up from the $634 million quarter that they delivered in the first quarter of 2024. So I'm talking about going from 634 last May to now 828 million this May, being flat. I think that this is obviously an under prediction here. It's very conservative. I would also anticipate that it's north of 850 million, but for now, let's just take the 828. That would still mean that you're up 31% quarter over quarter. Year over year, which I think is still massive. And then also what you could say, some key numbers coming from that is you could expect to be over $3 billion in trailing 12-month revenue, which is a new kind of record for us. That's up from 2.86 billion in the fourth quarter. So that'll bring in some really good opportunities for that just alone. I mean, I see 850. That I saw the 868 there. I could see something like an 850 coming in very easily. That would be a 34% growth. What they had there, the 868 is 37% growth. I don't think it's unbelievable to potentially get a 40% quarter. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. But what I can say is if you do have that $868 million quarter, it's only a 5% quarter over quarter increase. And generally what we've been able to see is anywhere between 5 to 7%. Last quarter, in the fourth quarter, was obviously an abnormal year or an abnormal quarter. And Amir and I chatted. He was thinking it would be north of 10%. I thought he was insane, and he was right. You know, he came out and Palantir showed up with a 14% quarter-over-quarter revenue growth going from 725 million to 828 million, over $103 million increase quarter-over-quarter, leading to that 14%. So it's possible. I honestly think, I don't know, 40% is a lot. In order to get there, you would need to get to, let me just do some quick math here.
I think it's 930. It might be a little wrong.
930 might be a little high. My math might be wrong, but I'm seeing
900.
like
900.
900 flat would be 42%. I'm saying like 890, very close. Yeah, to 900. And that would be 7% quarter-over-quarter, which isn't unfathomable. So I think it all just really depends on, do we think the first quarter is going to bring in a lot of potential growth or not? I don't know. But I can say for a fact, we will hit above 828 million. I would put a lot of money on that.
The analysts are assuming 860, so we would need to get to Matt's number of 890-ish to get 40%, which, psychologically, a SaaS company growing 40% is something the market loves, especially in the AI space. Arnie, do you think 40%? Two questions. Is it possible? And then B, is it necessary going into Q1?
Is it possible? Absolutely, yes. Can I say, we can't be certain. I see good probabilities that we actually hit that number, or at least very close to from that. Already, we start from a 36% guided. Typically, they tend to do a little bit better. Where I think that could be a very big surprise is more on the margin side of things. That I think that is something we tend to focus more into the revenue growth, but a very big chunk of where Palantir created value is actually on the bottom line, because essentially by scaling the same infrastructure to many more clients, and the same clients keep expanding, the marginal cost for producing more revenue just drops a lot, which in other words means profits. And I think right now we're guided for around 42% EBIT margin adjusted. I think this percentage will gradually go north, probably in the 50-60% over time, if actually maybe even a bit better. So I think we need to have patience there. Also think about all the topic about AI, FD, and so on. Like that could be a very, very big boost in terms of acquiring customers faster, expanding existing one more, and essentially not needing too many people to keep expanding. Is it necessary to actually surprise, like beat the expectations to keep this level of valuation? I personally think so, because essentially when you're trading at such a high multiple, we are talking of more than 70 times sales, 170x free cash flow. Like we are talking about valuations that are little beyond what is typically reasonable to think of a company. Palantir is emerging as really a tier one company, but it's fair to say these numbers are on the very, 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 very high end of the valuation spectrum. And if we didn't have this absurd acceleration combined with margin expansions, the valuation would be completely nuts. So the key question, as again, referring to what we were sharing before, is the story set to keep accelerating from here? If yes, and the numbers show that, the narrative that the management is able to share actually sustain that, we can be perfectly fine. If there are any signs of weakness that make the market scared of, oh, wait a second, you're promising AI operating system and so on, and you're just growing, okay, no more acceleration, no more margin expansion, then it is very hard to justify this price. So I see there is a risk. Personally, I'm taking the bet that the narrative is continue to keep improving along with the numbers, but I'm aware of the risk.
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. I think all of us know objectively Palantir is expensive here, but the narrative has been pretty strong. And when you have things like the NATO deal that was announced a couple weeks ago, in terms of, we already know NATO is going to be spending more of their GDP, percentage of GDP on defense, which is important. And now Palantir Maven is going to be used there. We've seen many, many different commercial deals throughout AIPCon, which was in Q1. I think they had literally 15 deals announced back to back to back. Arnie had a great post today highlighting all of the deals. And it's a long list because there were a lot of different deals. So it seems like commercial momentum is there. I want to switch the conversation to government momentum. Matt, do you think government's going to hit an inflection point like we saw with U.S. commercial 3 quarters ago?
Good question. I don't know, but I have an inkling that we're going to continue to see that Palantir plays in this space, just based off the fact that we've seen the efficiencies in the commercial contracts we've seen, as well as the government in the past, recognizing that there is some sort of Doge component as to what's going on in the government right now, and also just streamlining the space industry budget, streamlining a lot of different budgets, not necessarily just Doge, but actually just taking those, for example. I think there needs to be, in my opinion, maybe I'm biased, some sort of Palantir-like software implemented within the government to help with respect to data storage, with respect to just the efficiencies of the government, etc. There are so many disparate data systems that go on within the government that utilizing something like a Palantir could really assist. I mean, you think about it, every United States citizen has a social security number. I'm sure that that is being tracked at millions of different databases within the government, when in reality, it probably should just be tracked in one. So cloud computing costs associated with storage fees and all that can really be useful. And they could utilize Apollo to ensure who has the appropriate access to specific data and who doesn't. I mean, Palantir's been some of the best in terms of my usage with it within the group, to make sure that the right people have right access to the right data, and the people that don't need that access to that data within hours or sometimes days get cut off from that data if they move roles, etc. So it's pretty interesting. So no, I don't have a direct answer for you, unfortunately, but I do think that Palantir could play into this for sure.
Okay, I think an interesting data point is that the company is guiding for $3.7 billion revenue for 2025, but they also shared that they want to have US commercial exceeding 1 billion, representing a growth of at least 54%. So I read this as they know US commercial is killing it, and right now that is taking a very big percentage of the overall revenue, essentially bringing all the business growth along with it. But on the US government, we have this insane option from the work that Palantir has been doing, supposedly with Doge, but be that or not, we know that the government now has the pressure of, we need to have AI somehow, because we can't deploy the same amount of people. We can't deploy consultants like before. So how you solve the problem is by software. So there is this demand environment that I think is very positive. But then we have also all the initiatives. For instance, the Golden Dome potential contract that could arise. There is a very recent interview with Sham asking, so you are aspiring to do this work with all these other tech companies on the Golden Dome? Does it mean a contract is coming? And Sham was like, I have nothing to comment.
Let me actually let me share that right here, because this happened a couple of days ago.
Would love to get your take as well on Trump's Golden Dome. We know Anduril is part of this. We know SpaceX is part of this. Will Palantir be part of this project?
Well, we aspire to be. I think Golden Dome is very early on. I think that the most impressive thing about the executive order around Golden Dome is setting the time frame. You know, Alex Karp has famously said, if you want to have a project succeed, cut the time frame in half and then divide by 5 again. And so setting a time frame that this thing has to be operational inside of the administration is the forcing function that enables everyone to reimagine how you're going to go about solving the problem, and is changing the kind of inertia of how people would have solved it before. That's going to create a lot of innovation, a lot more capability, bring a lot of new players to the space.
You said aspiring to. So should we be expecting an announcement at some point?
That's I have no comment on that.
What about working together with
Wait. Like, have you seen like that final microsecond of I can't comment on that.
No, I know, but like,
is so much. Is Palantir winning the NHS contract? I can't comment.
no, and there was already a rumor by the Financial Times like a week ago that Palantir is working with Anduril and Golden Dome. So like, you would think if any software company would be operating what the Golden Dome would look like, probably is Palantir, right? So Arnie, you think they beat government estimates?
So I think government is where we could be surprised. That brings us to an overall revenue growth that can be very high. So let's put it this way. US commercial right now is on the roll. It is actually growing 30%. The US government, especially like in the last quarter, got a bit of acceleration, but how we could potentially reach a 40, ideally, hopefully a 50% growth is by having also the US, like the government in general, pushed more by US commercial, but we know that even abroad, stuff are moving. And I'm thinking of NATO, of course, we just touched it. But have you noticed also the UK is expanding more the usage of Maven. There are many things going on. So let's put it this way, the more Palantir is able to show itself as the operating system for government, for military operations, non-military operations, the more actually it's easier for everything to actually keep scrolling also on the government space. Don't forget also all the initiatives that are sort of in between government and private, because FedStart actually seems to be on a roll. Thinking of what was it, Google Cloud partnership towards FedStart. So there are many initiatives that give us the hint that there is a lot of money that is circulating toward defense tech, and Palantir is becoming that bridge to bring the capabilities that entrepreneurs want to bring to connecting what the government actually does, has already done in terms of data and so on. So I think there is a huge potential here, which consolidates everything. And if Palantir can be at the same time the bridge to connect this tech ecosystem, meanwhile it is also being discovered as the operating system to actually build the company, talking about software infrastructure, but also with warp speed, also how to help manufacturing. That is truly, truly an insane potential. And you know what's even best? How many companies are doing something similar? Like we started years ago thinking, oh, Palantir is ahead of competition. Look, now 4 years later or whatever it is, we still don't see any real competition from these huge tech companies that are supposed to kill Palantir.
Well, Matt, go ahead. If you're going to say
Well, I was just going to add in another piece that I don't know if people really recognize, and I think a lot of people know I work in the energy sector. Palantir has helped in that immensely. We did sign the U.S. and Ukraine to sign the minerals deal, and so it's almost like a very symbiotic relationship, because we know Palantir is obviously in Ukraine and has been helping with that effort since 2022. It might be a natural progression for them to also assist with respect to the minerals deal and being able to help account for those volumes, whether it's from an energy perspective or just accounting for the barrels or dollars coming back, whether it's I'm used to saying barrels, but barrels or tonnage or whatever have you in terms of what minerals are being sold in Ukraine. So ensuring that the United States get paid back the 50% of the $300 billion. So I feel like it's a very natural progression, and that obviously would come from the government side as well.
Yeah, we did a lot in Ukraine. Ukraine now is paying back the United States through rare earth minerals. BlackRock has a fund in Ukraine for reconstruction. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that the government side of the business, along with NATO, and then obviously USG, which we think Palantir is crushing it in with Doge and a variety of other things, could surprise us. I think that's going to be the biggest surprise is government growth. And in terms of my opinion on this, I think there's a world. Matt, what you said today was so good. It's like if we're flat, we're at 31. We were just at 36.
Yep.
I doubt they want to sequentially decrease quarter over quarter. So like, let's assume we get 36. And then if they beat by a couple percent, you're closing in on 40. And I think that number, when the street sees 40. Okay, so here's the next question. Let's say we get 40% growth. Stock is trading at pretty aggressive multiples. What do you think happens?
I was actually thinking about this because you asked Arnie, like, do we need to get there? I think that if you show up at 36%, which matches last quarter's growth, and that's fine. I think you'll still be okay. I think if you show up below 36%, it's going to be not good unless you have some sort of news event, like the Golden Dome contract, for example, or further expansion of the healthcare system within other countries within the European Union, or some sort of promise that can offset saying, basically, we didn't hit 36% and we actually decreased in terms of continued growth. Because I think everyone's starting to see, we dipped down to at one point, sorry, let me get my numbers here. We dipped down to 1.13% year-over-year growth back in 2Q of 23, and it has been a very steady trajectory over the past 2 years almost to get back to where we are at 36%. So if we do that pivot, and I think the reason why people are so excited is because they see that trajectory going to 40 to 50 and they have yet to see it kind of tail over. It's been a very consistent trend upwards. If there is that sort of plateau period, people could say, are we going to head back to 13? Or are we going to, are we going to stay at 30? 30% is great, right? And I'm not saying, but like you stated earlier, and Arnie stated eloquently earlier, the company is generational, once in a generation, very superior sort of company, but would a 30% year-over-year revenue growth this early in its infancy still warrant the type of valuation? I think that's tough. Now, if we show up at 45% revenue growth, then the stock's going to go bonkers, right? So I think you kind of have this fine line between, if you're below 36, you have to come with something. If you're between 36 and 40, I still feel like you'll have to have a very good narrative potentially. If you're above 40, then it's going to go gangbusters.
At the end of the day, is a dynamic that is similar to when Palantir was trading at a very, very high valuation back in 2021, where the price was incorporating something like 40-50% growth with margin expanding. But the unfortunate truth is that in 2022, then the business just crashed, like it stopped for some internal reasons, but for the entire environment reason. I think now the difference is the AI momentum is actually very, very strong. And I think there are good reasons for thinking we are not at the end of the cycle yet. One thing that I consider as a benchmark is everybody is now experimenting and trying AI. Companies are accepting this idea of AI agents. There will be probably a lot of chaos. There will be some shocks. For instance, one simple thing that I think sooner or later will happen is a major negative press release because some big companies deploying AI agents will make a big mistakes sooner or later, which could maybe for the short term stop the loop. But I think until we don't see like a crazy crazy craze of AI IPOs, stupid things happening like a $200 billion valuation with no revenues or the sort. We are still in the phase where the momentum keeps momenting. One thing that I think is interesting to share that I personally noticed before when I was just looking again at the numbers is this thing related to US commercial. Because we know US commercial is booming, but the last quarter we got a TCV value, so total contract value, that is completely boom. Like it was essentially 3x what it was in the last quarters before Q4, combined with a number of deals that has been exploding as well. So the number of deals is exploding, but it seems also the size of the deals is also exploding. So if this can continue, we could really set the basis for a US commercial that in our mind is already growing very, very fast in the 50%. But we can't exclude that this stuff can start showing some truly, truly insane numbers like 70% or more. And I'm thinking of how OpenAI and all of these other companies are actually growing. I think, Amit, you showed something like a small startup that went from like
this transition
100, 300.
Yeah, let me pull this up. This transitions us really well into this point, and this is an argument that I think it kind of, I don't want to say justifies the valuation, but it's an argument that makes you think twice when someone says, Palantir and the valuation makes absolutely no sense. So Cursor is an AI startup, and the company essentially allows you to do vibe coding. And what is vibe coding? Vibe coding is when you're coding with an editor and you're asking the AI to help you code. So it should theoretically 100x a software engineer's productivity because they don't have to code every little thing because they have this AI helping them. Palantir actually introduced a feature like this in AIP a couple of days ago. And so a lot of companies are hopping on this trend and this idea. So this startup that's dedicated to it, they're the fastest company in the world to get to $100 million in revenue ever in the history of every single startup. Now they're at 300 million ARR. They had 100 million ARR 2 months ago. They're raising at 10 billion. The point of bringing this up is not really the 100 to 300 million ramp up, but rather how quickly a tool around artificial intelligence, is really the first that we've seen outside of ChatGPT, is growing. And when these things are growing this quick, it kind of begs the question, and I think it should make all of us have a little bit of humility of, are we underestimating how gigantic this AI revolution is going to be, and why the street, if it's not all retail buying Palantir, is putting all this money into the stock and pulling forward all these growth estimates because they think the growth is going to be bigger than we could ever imagine. Any thoughts on that and kind of where that puts us in terms of the valuation as well?
This is a complex situation, and when you have complex situations, you try to solve that thinking first principle. What I mean with that is, let's try to assess what we actually know for sure. And what we know for sure, the US commercial business is clearly booming, and Palantir's offering works. Big techs are promising things, but at the end of the day, as of today, they're only focusing to the cloud part, which, by the way, is truly booming. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember I read Microsoft Azure has accelerated again to around
35% growth. Yep.
So considering the scale that business has, that's to me a hint that there is so much money that is circulating around in this AI sphere that is almost embarrassing to see. This money right now is more focused into more stupid products. And the fact that, for instance, this Cursor has been growing this fast, despite having a solution that more or less replicates other stuff, gives me a hint again that the size of the money movement around is truly big, and Palantir has these solutions that tackle the next wave of awareness, meaning that now people are still focused on the smarter bots. Palantir has already ready and being deploying AI agents, which we all know that is the next big thing towards everybody's working on. So I see serious chances we are completely underestimating how big this wave is getting.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of AI bullshit startups that are getting stupid valuations, and that's published. But Cursor, this is the first one I've seen outside of the ChatGPTs and the robotics companies that, like, I mean, they're charged $20 a month. Like, this is not some complex, and like $300 million of revenue in a couple months is insane. Matt, do you think that helps hype up the AI story that will eventually allow Palantir to grow into the valuation?
Well, I think you said something that's very important, which is everybody over the last 6 months to a year has said AI about 35 to 40 times within their conference calls. And so I think now we're starting to see a deflation of some of those companies that have been talking about it, but not actually showing up. And the money is actually being attracted to the companies like Palantir, for example, which is why you brought up the question, that are actually showing real results when it comes to artificial intelligence and what kind of efficiencies can be made. And so I agree with Arnie. I still think there's a lot of capital out there, but I think they're being more peculiar about just blanketly investing in random companies and looking for things that are the real deal. And so that might be the reason why Palantir has caught as much of a bid as it has over the past 6 months, because I think everybody and their mother, starting in the first quarter, second quarter last year, was talking about AI, even though their company didn't even have anything to do with it. And next thing you know, a lot of these companies, I don't want to say deflated in stock price because some of them are still massively elevated, but I think gone are the days of just blanketly investing when somebody says AI on a conference call. I think people are looking for some legitimate action, which I think people are starting to fully recognize within Palantir. And I think that's what we recognized many moons ago with respect to digital twins and the ability to catch efficiencies within commercial and government opportunities. So yeah, hopefully, I know I didn't exactly answer your point, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, your argument is just that Palantir is actually proving real AI, which is, I think all of us have different reasons for why the stock is where it is right now. But part of it is that there's not really any pure play AI software companies growing like Palantir is growing. Like, a lot of these AI names as well are not, like, Salesforce has a ton of AI, but they're not exciting. They don't have the retail investor interest, and like it's an institutional stock that has been owned for a long time. It's not that interesting. The big tech companies probably can't 3-4x that easily. It's going to take a lot of time. Palantir is one of those companies where you think it legitimately could 3-4x still from these levels, and it's in the infancy of its growth. Now, that commands a very, very aggressive multiple to even get to the level we're at right now. But if the narrative is what people buy into, I think that's also something that leads to this current stock price. One other thing that's important, and Arnie, you could speak to this, is that retail's not selling. And I think this is another big point, right? Retail has averages of 20 and below. A lot of us. This was just one of those things that it happened for us. Even if your average is like 35 or 40 and below, the margin of safety from the stock at 125 falling, I mean, you got 50% to go to break even, and many of us are still up 4 or 5x, even if it falls 50%, which is why I think some people who truly are long-term investors, and they don't just say they're long-term investors, they want to see the story play out. And if they're not selling at 125 because their plan is to sell at 500, if it goes from 125 to 60 in 2025 and then 500 in 2035, they're not going to care. So, Arnie, do you think that's what's also keeping the stock elevated, which is that people just aren't selling?
I think it helps, but I'm not sure that that dynamic is enough to actually essentially create that scarcity in the stock so that it generates a dynamic like GameStop. Like, that was clearly retails are not selling, institutionals are forced to buy. I think here is a more natural movement of there is a very high demand, and both retail and institutionals are interested in the story. And as long as the story is interesting and becomes more interesting, there is just more desire to participate to the story rather than missing it. I think there is a peculiar psychological, let's call it bias, but phenomenon, where you're more prone, or at least that's what I'm thinking. Like, I'm more prone to sell something when it's up like 50%, rather than when it starts compounding at like 15x. Right now, my Palantir position is like 12 or 13x. I'm like, yes, if it drops, it would be very annoying. But at the end of the day, I can't really complain, and I just want to let it go without having to pay taxes. Because right now, if let's say I sell all the position, I would pay so much taxes that would kill a potential compound effect. While it would be the equivalent of getting a very big loss while also getting the gain. So I reached the point where I'm a believer of the long-term story, unless something goes completely nuts. And I have signals that the story can't keep improving from here. I'm more for the, okay, I just let it go. I have enough cash on the side so that I'm not too worried about the stock movements here and there. And I think this dynamic makes creating more scarcity, but on the grand scheme of things, the retails that have these insane averages are not that many to essentially create a sort of short squeeze or an anomaly.
Yep, I would think that is fair. Real quick, some super chats. Christopher, thank you for the $5. Thank you, Amit, for supporting the retail investor community. So much great info, great community. Let's go on a Palantir pump on Monday. Christopher, thank you for being here. We'll all be here with the community. As always, it's always a community-driven event on earnings, so all of us will be here. Rob, thank you for the $5. Essentially, your argument here is that ChatGPT is worth $300 billion. What does that mean on Palantir stock price? I think we've talked about this many times. It's a fair argument that if ChatGPT that's unprofitable can get to $300 billion, what does that mean for Palantir's profitability and getting to the same market cap? Now, obviously, GPT is growing revenues at like 400% or some crazy number, so a lot of the growth is there. But also, one could argue that Palantir is going to be more operationally important in a decade than GPT because it's a chatbot that could be commoditized. So I think that's a broader narrative that has to play out. It does lead to a conversation around profitability, though. Matt, 30% of the net income is treasury income. JPOW is probably cutting rates in June. Is one of the things you're looking for to see operating income margins significantly increase so that business income from operations can offset the losses from the net interest income that goes away when Powell cuts rates?
Good question. Yeah, it's definitely something I'm looking at. So we've seen a pretty good steady increase in cash flow from operations and the margin that's coming from that. We obviously saw 56% in the fourth quarter, which was abnormal, is on the high side. And the highest that we had seen 50% in 2023, which is also pretty high. But I normally see between 20 and 30%. So that amount that I'm seeing, I'm kind of thinking that we're going to get 25 to 30% in terms of cash. The actual income, though, that's a good point. I don't necessarily know where we get with respect to that. The net generally has been kind of in the 17 to 20% range over the past trailing 12 months. So I'm assuming we're probably stay within there. But like you stated, I think you're going to see two things. You're continuing to see pretty aggressive revenue growth, which I think is going to offset part of that that decrease in interest income. And I don't think we're going to see interest income cut enough where it will fully offset that gain that we get from revenue growth, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So I think we're going to, you might see it kind of plateau for a minute, but I think we're going to power through the cycle when it comes to kind of decreasing interest rates. And I think we'll be quite okay. And before we kind of jump specifically to maybe Arnie's thoughts, I wanted to address something that I think it was Sam Thompson had said, and it basically stated that the first quarter generally over the past 4 to 5 years has showed up weaker than the fourth quarter. But that being stated, I want to acknowledge that we're coming off an extremely strong fourth quarter, being 14% quarter over quarter. So even at a 7% quarter over quarter, which is what we've seen in the second and third quarters, in terms of revenue growth, you still get to 40%.
Yeah.
So you have to think that because you've been attracting such a strong track record over the past trailing 12, something as simple as a 7% quarter over quarter growth will still get you to over close to a 40% revenue growth. So Sam, appreciate that particular comment, and you were right. So I'll just quote some numbers, and generally speaking, something that people could put in the back of their hat for the future. Generally speaking, the fourth quarter is the largest quarter over quarter revenue growth. So with the exception of 2020, so 2020 was the only exception. We saw 15% quarter over quarter in 3Q, 11% in the fourth quarter, but 10%, which was the largest in 2021, and then in 2022 was 6%. We did not exceed 6% in 2022. Quarter over quarter in the fourth quarter of 23, we saw 9%. We did not exceed 9%. That was the highest in 2023. And then obviously we just did the 14% in the fourth quarter of 2024. And previous quarters were 4% and 7% and 7% for the first, second, and third quarter respectively. So, but like I said, going from 14% to 7%, we're still going to see 40% revenue growth potentially.
Arnie, your thoughts on net interest income?
Can I say that I don't really care? What I mean with that is, it's important to be aware of everything. I personally think the dynamic of the net interest is just a stupid point that here and there you see bears arising. But 50% of the Palantir net income comes from, okay. So what's the point? Like when you talk about Airbnb, is like almost is a way bigger thing, and you should ask yourself, okay, is that a sign of weakness or strength? Like why Palantir has so much income coming from treasuries is because it's an money printing machine that is producing more money than it actually needs to keep growing, and they're making just more cash, preserving optionality while also growing and expanding the margins. So, and they are like, as a company ready to benefit from whatever shock in the real world. Financially, they're in a very strong position where if the stock drops stupidly, they can buy back more shares. There are good chances that actually they deployed more buyback in Q1 since the stock dropped quite a bit. Also, Robinhood did that. So when you see these points of 30% of Palantir net income comes from net, it's like, okay, so what? Because that is a point that doesn't add anything to the grand scheme of things. It's something you need to be aware. You need to ask yourself, is it a good or it is a bad? I would be worried if Palantir had the net income shrinking due to debt. Because let's put it this way, if you think like a 30% net income coming from net interest is actually bad, it means that you would think having debt killing your net income would be actually good. That's stupid. So the first thing doesn't make sense. And apart from that is the detachment from what it really matters, because you are talking about a growth company where the theme, like the story, the equity story of is the company dominating its space? Is the company set to completely dominate the space in 10 years? Okay, that's the core question. How that is reflected in the numbers, and you mostly look at the revenue growth and how that revenue becomes margins. And the margins you care are the operating margins, not much the net income, which is after the financial component. Because if you think something like that is bad, like having a bigger net income percentage from interest, you're looking at something that could be potentially changed very easily. Let's put this way. Palantir can now use all the $4 billion cash or whatever in buyback. Boom. Then you would have net income being 0% of the operating income. That would make these bears happy. That doesn't make any sense. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I just wanted to add. I mean, I think if you're looking specifically at net income, you're missing the whole picture of Palantir. And I think what a lot of people have recognized, and hopefully, maybe this is a learning point for people that haven't recognized this yet, is people need to look specifically at the cash from operations for Palantir and how that has been a pivotal point. Because when you specifically look at net income, you're going to have to include general allowed accounting practices, and that's going to show up as offset by the share-based compensation. We all know that Palantir is very into sharing share-based compensation with the employees to be able to help retain talent, and as well as the fact that the stock has obviously gone gangbusters, and so they're rewarding the employees and executives within the group to be able to share that wealth along with everybody. And it has been a almost 25-year journey for them, so they well warrant it. But I hope that people recognize now that, yes, if you're comparing net income and you're afraid that, okay, this drop might cause some people to get a little bit scared, let's look at the fourth quarter, right? The fourth quarter had some of the best cash flow operations margins of over 40, actually it was 56%, sorry, and absolutely dominated, but the net income was still only 11 million, as you just showed. So, the stock obviously did not tank on that news. And I would anticipate if the cash flow from operations continues to be so expansive, it'll be a great opportunity for the company to continue to do well. And also, going into that and diving a little bit deeper, the trailing 12-month cash flow from operations was over $1 billion in the fourth quarter. I expected to get over 1.1 billion, meaning that every year we're adding north of $1 billion to the bottom line, recognizing that we have zero debt, basically, coupled with the fact that we don't have a lot of capital expenditure. So that's why you saw the cash volume here go from, I think it was like 3.9 or 4.1 billion to over 5.2 within the trailing 12 months. So that cash position continues to grow. So I think, as Arnie kind of said, I mean, yes, $200 million in net income coming directly from the treasuries is awesome. But I think in the long term, I mean, we don't talk about how Apple gets $3 to $4 billion a year in treasury income. We don't talk about how Google gets $3 to $4 billion a year. It's going to show up as a small point that it's a well financialized company that is starting to throw up a lot of cash. And I think we should be more concerned about what are we going to do with that cash, whether that's investing into other opportunities, investing in stuff like Anduril or other great revenue or venture capital opportunities, or are we going to start buying back some of the stock to hopefully offset some of the share-based compensation, which we've recognized all of us as shareholders have been diluted, and that's okay with me as long as the company continues in the right direction. So to me, that's more important in the actual income from treasuries. Now that we're in our 10th quarter of cash flow positivity, I think it's okay, and I'm not too concerned about it.
Can I show you something that I think went completely underrated, and I'm also part of this underratement? Is, have you ever seen how much the company has actually bought back shares in Q4 related to the cash from operations? Like
how much did they bought? What, 1 million shares in Q4?
In Q4, they bought back $230 million in shares, and they generated 460 million from operations. So like half of the cash from operations actually went to buyback. And in Q1, we know that in the initial months, again, the initial part, the stock was very high, so probably they didn't buy back much, but towards the end of the quarter, the stock was cut in half. So we should not exclude that actually they performed a very good buyback, as we were saying. Also, Robinhood did. I would be very curious, to be honest, to see what they did here.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so all of us going into earnings are bullish on top line growth, bullish on the rule of 40, margins, all that stuff. So what do we think the stock does?
I just want to. I'm just looking at the.
Let's say we have a Robinhood event. It's like bet on stock up, stock down. What's the percentage?
I'm going with it's going to go up, dude. If we see a 40% growth number, I think we pump. I don't think, and nothing's, maybe the pump is not sustainable for the coming weeks, but I think in that raw moment of everyone realizing this is growing 40%, it takes off. That's my take.
I think it's going to be hard just based off that number that I calculated, and I sent that across to several people, and I'm glad you guys saw it as well. I mean, just staying flat, you're up 31%. I mean, it's very hard. I feel like the company really has to fall flat on their face to have a bad quarter when it comes to year over year. And I don't think that if you show up even at a 3 or 4% quarter over quarter revenue growth, I don't think you're going to be punished. I really think that where you're going to get punished is if you show up at, say, 1 to 2%, or even somehow go negative, which I find it very hard to believe. I don't think I've seen a quarter where Palantir has actually gone negative in the previous, where it's actually dipped. It's always had a very steady trajectory. We've seen potential close flat, like in 2Q 22 to 3Q 22, we only saw like a 1% quarter over quarter. But other than that, it's been smooth sailing, couple percentage points every single quarter. So I would find it hard to believe where we're in a situation where it doesn't pump just based off the momentum that the company has. And then also, Artie, I would just double check that share-based compensation number. I looked at the SEC 10K, and I'll ask you offline if you could share that with me, because I'm still seeing 64 million in repurchases, so I'm a little bit confused.
Okay. It could be a weird number.
Yeah, we can talk about it offline.
64 is the number I was for. That's why I thought it was a million shares at like around that price, 64. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'll check. Thank you.
All right. So last thing for today, we did have a big thing happen this week, and it was Karp at the Hill and Valley Forum. He was interrupted by a protester who wanted to speak out about Palantir's support of Israel. This is how Karp handled it, and I just want to get the panel's thoughts on a public CEO dealing with a protester and what his response was.
One of the most important things, first of all, I really support free speech. So the part where you get up and say what you think, I'm 100% on your side. Like, if you want to come in here and accuse us of doing bad things, regurgitate where I'm a sick, bad person who's doing it for power and I'm enjoying watching people suffer. Okay, great. I 100% support her right to say that. But the thing on our side that we have to fight for is we have to fight for a right to discuss and say our side of this or my side of this. And like, one of the most important things about the book, which you may not want to read, is you don't need to read, is if your argument is that strong, why will you not let the other side talk? And there, it's like obviously, if the argument was as simple, and by the way, the pain of Palestinians is something that everybody, and anyone who dies in war, obviously people care about, I care about that. The obvious solution to war is to have the West having the strongest, most precise, deadly weapons possible so that we can minimize unnecessary innocent deaths. And by the way, the primary way you minimize these deaths is you're so strong no one attacks you. And that's how you actually do it. Now,
so Karp's broader point there was that the inability for the protester to listen to Karp, I didn't show this part, but basically she kept heckling back and forth when he tried to engage with her and respond to her question. His argument was that is the issue in society right now. Matt, your take on how Karp handled that situation?
I think he handled it gallantly. I think I agree with him. I actually wrote a follow-up tweet specifically around that, and you had already gone like, I don't know, past noon or something, and you didn't share it. You didn't have the opportunity to show it, and so I went and off and looked at it on my own, and it was a couple hours after it happened. And I don't think this is, specifically an Israel-Palestine discussion. I think as much as people want to specifically focus in on that particular piece, I think that there's two things that are kind of going on here, and I kind of want to move past Israel-Palestine because, just like you stated, the next day, I'm not nearly educated on geopolitics enough to be able to speak coherently to that. But I think we live so much in a diverse world that has helped us so immensely since the invention of the car, and have so many diverse ideas and ways that we kind of think and live, that it's the reason why we become so great. But yet we don't harbor that diversity of thought anymore and have meaningful discussions. I think we really focus now on calling people racist, bigots, and use divisive language instead of really getting to the real reason why we have the First Amendment in the first place, which is freedom of speech, and actually getting to understand other people's perspectives. And so I encourage everybody to listen to Dr. Karp here and not necessarily hyper focus in specifically on the topic at hand, which in this case was Israel versus Palestine, but it really just the divisiveness that we have within everything that we do. I mean, just the Trump-Kamala election has been very divisive. Just the whole, there's so many different events that have happened over the past 4 to 5 years where I feel like since the pandemic, it has only gotten worse in terms of people wanting to really hyper focus on divisive language. And so I encourage people to be better. Don't rush to judge, but really rush to comprehend what the other side is saying, and you might learn something. But very often I get people, immediately jumping to call me names, but they don't want to actually come up with a reasonable thought. I often message people back, and people probably think I'm trolling when I say something like this. If somebody brings up a point that's kind of like unfinished or incoherent or very loosely stated, I say dive deeper on that. I don't call them an idiot. I don't call them, some sort of divisive word that makes them feel bad. And sometimes I do lash out. So, I'm working on that personally. But most of the time I try to ask people and really try to understand where they're coming from. If they feel hurt or they sound hurt, I try to understand what's causing them to think that way, because I'm not perfect and I was raised a certain way. And just because somebody else was raised a different way doesn't mean that they were wrong. Right. So I try to understand, and I try to really embrace, because I've been, my eyes have been opened up so much since I went to college and had the opportunity to move across the country and live in a different country as well, that I recognize that I am no better than any other individual that's on this panel, in this chat, anybody on X. And so the only way I can see that I am better than somebody is how they might conduct themselves. And so, I really just try to embrace that. And then also, what was the second thing that I wanted to kind of bring up? Anyway, I'll leave it there because that's on topic. But there was another thing. I think it's also very funny as well. Similar to this sort of notion that everyone wants to jump to using some sort of divisive language. I feel like everybody thinks that their opinion matters as well. So I feel like this is kind of like very, but I think, 5-10 years ago, or maybe when I was a little bit younger, in the 90s and early 2000s, I felt like, and this is a comedian that kind of said this, so hopefully I can deliver this with a little bit of comedic timing. But it was basically like, when you had people in the room that actually knew what they were talking about, everyone else would shut the fuck up and listen. And now I feel like everybody and their mother, regardless of whether or not they actually have a meaningful opinion, decides that they want to speak on a subject. And I think it's so hard these days, whether you're on X, YouTube, to try to decipher what's somebody's actual opinion versus what's actual fact. And I feel like that because we've given people this platform, sometimes they feel like that they have to acknowledge, or they have to come up with something and fill the airwaves. But at the end of the day, I think sometimes we just need to shut the fuck up and listen to some people And if you don't necessarily have anything important to add, nor do you have a good ground to stand on, sometimes it's better. We do have 2 ears in one mouth for a reason. And I feel like most of the time people act like they have 2 mouths in 1 ear, or sometimes no ears at all. So a little bit of actually talking about what Karp said, and then maybe a little bit of my own thoughts.
I would agree. Arnie, your thoughts on how Karp handled it?
Well, sorry, first, a very short thing. I checked the buyback number. Actually, yes, on the platform, that's a wrong number. It's like 64 million for the entire year. So
we have to short FinChat. Short FinChat. That's it.
Exactly. So forgot what I said before, but still, let's keep an eye on the buyback number for Q1, because I think we could be surprised there. On Karp, I always find fascinating this kind of discussions, because the reality is the reason why she can express her voice is exactly due to the existence of something like Palantir that can help protect the values for which Palantir and the US is fighting for.
AKA, in certain countries, she could not have yelled out to someone on stage. She would have been killed.
Exactly. Talking about China, Russia, and probably also around Palestine and so on, like try express your voice like that, and probably you see different consequences than just being humiliated on stage. My simple observation is when Karp hits with a de facto or by the way, you know that he's winning the argument. That's my observation.
Yeah, I would agree with both you guys. I mean, at the end of the day, if your argument is so good, you got to let other people say their argument. I've experienced this as a competitive debater. It's like, you should want to embrace the other side. So when she yells out at him, you're embracing a genocide, Palantir's killing everybody. He's like, oh, wow. All right. Well, here's my response. Can I speak? She says, yes. He starts speaking. And then immediately she says, you don't get a platform to speak. The whole point of the West is that we are, as Matt eloquently said, we are able to have diverse viewpoints, ideologically different ends of the spectrum, but still talk and not kill each other. Because if you can't talk it out, the inevitable result is you kill each other, right? It's violence. So the whole point of the West is to be able to have discourse and respect individual sovereignty. No matter who you are, you have the ability to express yourself. And as soon as she shut him down and didn't even want to hear his response after interrupting him, I think his response was perfect. He was like, well, why did you even interrupt if you didn't want to hear my side? And if you don't want to hear my side, do you want to kill me? Like, am I allowed to even be in this discussion? And if I'm not, then that embraces the types of values in this world that have led to really bad things. Versus the West, which I think we can argue has led to the better parts of the world.
I think there is a lesson apart from how to think properly at an intellectual level on things that matter. I think there is value also for us into learning how to embrace discussions when someone has a counter opinion against what we think of Palantir. Like, for instance, you notice, oh, Palantir is a bubble, Palantir is a scam, like a Palantir is trash or whatever. Like, okay, provide your arguments. And I provide my arguments trying to assess why essentially I believe your opinion is wrong. And that is also beneficial, so that on our side, we can attract more people that actually try to reason. But at the same time, it is also good for us to assess how are we truly convinced of what we say.
Yeah. How are you able to embrace the other side and have a meaningful discussion, a meaningful debate? Uniquely in this part of the world, we're allowed to actually have discourse with each other. Other parts of the world, as Matt said, Russia, China, I mean, you start talking, they don't like what you say, you're done. And
look what happened to Jack Ma. He disappeared for like 2 years.
I mean, even a billionaire just disappears. Think of it. Imagine if you are literally no one.
Yeah, and then this is when Karp says the West is superior, and he says it with all this confidence. This is why. Because in other parts of the world, you can't have these types of discussions. So that's what he stands up for. That's what he believes in. That's what Palantir vehemently embraces. And, that's what the world has started to realize, at least from Palantir's growth, is something they want to be associated with as well. All right, cool. That's it for us. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll be live 3:30 p.m. Eastern. It will be our Super Bowl once again on a very, very, very special journey that started 5 years ago, and it's turned into this incredible community. And that's just in one quarter in a many decade-long story that we have for Palantir. But we'll be excited to share it with everybody on Monday. All right. Thank you, everybody. Matt and Arnie's YouTube and Twitter in the description. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for having us all.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.